We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new style, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 5th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Arirang.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday, and Im Sang-hyuk.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. A recent study has found that South Koreans spend more than 40 hours per month on YouTube. A retail analytics firm called WiseApp surveyed South Korean users of the two major smartphone operating systems, Google's Android and Apple's iOS, and found out that the YouTube app was used for 111.9 billion minutes in January. This was the highest ever recorded and also double the number of minutes Koreans watched YouTube in 2019. Experts believe the platform saw a surge in popularity thanks to the introduction of YouTube Shorts in July 2021. And have you ever heard of the term car poor? It refers to those who flaunt their wealth by buying expensive premium cars outside of their budget. A lot of young South Koreans were stereotypically thought to be car poor because many bought high-end imported cars. However, the Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association found that such trend has flipped. The number of people in their 30s and under who bought domestic brand cars last year increased by 15.1% on year. Those who bought imported cars went down by 1.3%. This brought down the total proportion of imported car owners in their 20s and 30s to 17.8%. It is the first time in 14 years that this figure has been below 20%. And Google's generative AI service Gemini is facing criticism after creating inaccurate images of historical and public figures. Last week, Google paused Gemini's ability to generate images after it created racially diverse Nazi-era German soldiers, non-white U.S. founding fathers, and even a black Elon Musk. CEO Sundar Pichai admitted that the generative AI service offended users and showed bias. He apologized and said he would do whatever it takes to make necessary changes. This hasn't tamed the debate, though. Some are saying this is woke, others are saying it's misrepresentation. As much as there's so many different arguments on this issue, I'd like to ask our panelists in the studio where you stand.
So I think it's a bit overreaction to say that Gemini has awakened. I think it's just a common error that we can often find in these kind of generative AI when it comes to misrepresentations. So, but here I think the fact that this AI made this famous figure into the colored race is actually what caused this stir of conversation in our society. So as you know, these days racial bias has been a big issue in the States, and with the rise of the concept called the political correctness, companies and government officials have been really cautious not to cause any disturbance with their statements or actions. So in this case, I think it's not a matter of misrepresentation, but the data that was inputted to Gemini. So AI algorithms are based on the input data. So the thing is, if there is just too much biased data that are being inputted to the AI, then obviously the output will be biased too. So we can assume that data that went into the Gemini was misleading. For now, we cannot actually know whether this was intentional or not, but this issue implies that from now on, big tech giants should be more cautious about the data that they use, and they should actually discern whether it is biased or not.
Exactly. You mentioned a really good point there. I think it's not the app itself that we should be blaming. And you mentioned a good point in the sense that this isn't a debate of whether the app itself was woke or not, but I think the bigger issue is whether the input data or the data that this app is using to generate images were biased or not, because it's not the first time where we've seen a lot of buzz over a generative AI image. For instance, here in Korea, when we asked a generative AI app to make an image of what the stereotypical girl and guy looks like, that caused a great controversy because it seemed to be very biased. So we need to take a look at how that input data is being made. But Cheska, how do you think about this issue? Where do you stand on this issue?
I'm going to bring a little bit more lighthearted opinion. I thought it was quite fascinating, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, there's no doubt about the correctness of the information or the outcome that it produced. Obviously, it produced the wrong information. However, the fact that AI was able to cross gender and race, I thought was actually quite interesting. And of course, as Sang-hyuk said, I don't know what the algorithm went into it and why the information got mixed up. But the fact that AI generated something that went beyond just a racial boundary, to me, I just thought it was interesting.
You thought it could just be, some people can laugh it off and be, it's a funny error. It could be a little eye-opening.
Yeah, and also very possible.
Yeah, very possible. I mean, at the end of the day, it is AI. It's not human.
Yes.
Now, let's switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day now. Last year on NewsGen, we mentioned how officials and some companies are trying to implement a 4-day work week. And we've seen this idea gain some traction since major companies in Korea, like Samsung Electronics and SK, are implementing a shortened work schedule for their employees. So, Cheska, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this measure?
Sure, and I actually do remember last year, us together, we had a topic about whether South Korea would actually go forward with the private and public sector to implement the 4-day weekend. And here we are in the 2024, and some major global corporations like Samsung and SK are actually implementing a 4-day per week schedule for their employees. Now, POSCO, which is another major corporation, announced that it will allow alternating between 4-day to 5-day week for over 10,000 employees. Now, with this schedule, they can fully choose between which days they want to take off and use this time for extended weekends, family care, or self-development. And also one interesting thing was POSCO was also known for allowing its employees to freely choose the hours starting 5 years ago. So these corporations announced that they are actively implementing these tangible actions that actually do reflect the request and the demands of MZers, which is very interesting.
And you mentioned the reflecting the aspects of MZers, and I think that's the growing demand for a better balance between work and personal life, and we call that work-life balance. Now, what do you guys think about companies that are trying to accommodate our generation's yearning for a better work-life balance, starting with you, Sang-hyuk?
So I think, first of all, we can all agree that Korea is among one of the countries that have the longest working hours these days. So according to the OECD report in 2022, the working hours for one worker in South Korea stood at 1,901 hours per year, which was 149 hours longer than the OECD average of 1,752 hours, making South Korea in the 5th place among the OECD member states when it comes to working hours. So I'm glad that companies are finally making changes and decisions to accommodate the MZ's call for reduction in their working hours. Now, I think this will also boost the work proficiency and efficiency for the workers. Now, if you look at the West, most of the workers tend to be focused and immersed during their work hours. Now, here in Korea, I think there's this kind of odd belief among the workers that if they haven't done the assignments within the work hours, then they are just so feel free to work longer up until night. So, but working only 4 days a week will obviously nullify this belief. And so in either way, if we have to finish the work on time, then why don't we just wrap up the assignments quickly and take a rest for a whole day? So in that case, both companies and workers can receive benefits. So for companies, they will be able to boost the productivity under the premise that workers are focused on their work hours. And as for the workers, they will enjoy one more weekend without cutting a significant amount of their salary.
Exactly, and I'm well aware that our generation is all about efficiency and productivity, which is exactly why it seems that our generation has an inclination to want better work-life balance. But at the same time, I do understand for companies, it can't be applied to all industries. There are some industries, including news, for instance, where we have to come out on a daily basis. But at the same time, we're still seeing more companies try to accommodate our demands. And what do you think about that?
You know, I just want to make it clear there are definitely some positives which I would like to point out, and in that the corporates are allowing options and flexibility, which I think is a huge deal because they're acknowledging there is no, quote, one-fit-all solution. And I do understand how hard it can be for major corporates of big size to implement these kind of changes. So I have huge respect on that for the part that they're doing. Now, understanding the greater benefits allowing flexibility, I think, is an amazing change. As Sang-hyuk and we have all discussed here in the studio, the MZers have a very, very strong characteristic of valuing self-development and self-care. So I think there's a lot of positive discussions about spending the time off to actually get a license or study more or build themselves to become better professionals, or even actually getting fit so that they can stay longer hours at the workplace. You know, in my opinion, and much like the pun, it goes, happy wife, happy life, happy husband, happy house. So maybe happy employee, happy company, and happy company, happy country.
Exactly.
So here's to hoping.
Because if you think about it, most adults who are working, they spend most of their hours of their life in the company, might as well be happy, which will then lead to happier people in a happier country.
Yes.
Now, there are some unforeseen consequences of a 4-day work week, though.
Absolutely.
And why don't you guys start incorporating your own personal experience? Because I'm well aware, though you're freelancing now, you've worked at a company before. So what do you think could be some cons that we're overlooking before trying to really implement this 4-day work week?
That's why I was very clear about which parts were positive, and I do want to talk about the unforeseen consequences. So I think there are a few major concerns, and the most obvious one has to do with the payment. So there was an interesting survey regarding how MZers would react when it came down to days versus salary. Now let's take a look at the screen. When asked to choose between less day or less pay, it was split actually quite evenly in just perfectly half. A little over half said they would still have less day for less pays, while the other half actually said no. Now, one thing to bear in mind was that this survey was actually of job seekers. So I'm actually also interested to see how current employees would react, because aside from the pay cut, which is very important, another issue is how the rotation of days could affect colleagues depending on the profession, and may even make it impossible for some of their other colleagues to take the day off. Now, to give you a personal example, I have had an incident where my teammate would take a day off and enjoy his or her holiday. I wished nothing but happiness for that employee. However, my happiness depended on the completion of the project and the productivity. So it was quite difficult to progress without the teammate being present. So we eventually had to part ways on a good terms. But I was a freelancer, so I was able to have more flexibility. Now, this might be a little bit more difficult in a corporate setting.
Exactly. And Sang-Yeon, would you like to add on to anything that we might be missing? Because right now we've mostly talked about all the roses and all the happy parts of having a 4-day work week, but I do think that there are some consequences that we may be jumping over.
Yeah, you're right. So just like Cheska mentioned in the last part, another concern would be the job type when it comes to the working hours. So already in our society, most of the social benefits are only given to 정규직 or regular type workers. So benefits like health insurance and bank loans are only offered to the standard workers only. So even if we implement a 4-day work policy, it will be a distant future for contract workers, seasonal workers, and freelancers like me. So the working condition gap and labor market duality is already becoming a huge issue in the Korean society nowadays. So if we are to reduce the work hours for the regular workers, that is perfectly fine for me, but my point here is that we should also provide some kind of social benefits and care for other types of jobs as well to maintain the balance in the job market. So in fact, many European countries have standard rules for working hours for different job categories. So I think the Korean society should also consider the diversity within the job market to respect and benefit all different types of workers.
Right, so Sang-Yeon, you're saying we might as well just really look into our job system and reform things, not only for regular workers and the 4-day work system itself, but for all industries and all type of contract workers out there. And nonetheless, I think though we still need a lot of reform policies to roll out, the concept of a 4-day work week hasn't just been confined to Korea. We've seen global movement. So why don't we introduce some global cases of different countries trying to implement this system?
I had a very interesting outcome while I was doing research for this particular episode. And obviously, United States, one of the most diverse countries, did have some opinion about some of the MZers who quit finance jobs, took a survey, and almost 80% of them said they wanted 4-day week. But one of the more interesting things was, I really think Europe is in the lead when it comes to a 4-day week. So one of the world's largest study that was conducted was in UK. About 61 companies participated. There was about 3,000 workers, and it lasted for 6 months in 2022. Now, the outcome was so good that 92% of the companies decided to keep the 4-day week.
Wow.
And everybody, when they surveyed, much higher happiness level, mental health, just less burnout overall. But the more important thing was there was an average about 35% increase in revenue compared to the year before, even though they had a 4-day week. So that was quite interesting. And also countries like Belgium was actually the first European country to legislate like a 4-day week. And also there are countries like UAE and Iceland and many European countries that are actively practicing 4-day week to see how it comes out.
So Europe is leading the way when it comes to better accommodating our desire
I really
for
think
flexible
so.
working hours. What about other countries?
So if we turn the globe and move to East Asia, Asia, I think Japan is also Korea's strong rival when it comes to long working hours. And
Implementing changes too,
right,
yeah.
And many Japanese MZs have also been calling for the need for working 4 days a week. So recently, the Japanese branch of Microsoft implemented working only 4 days a week for its employees without cutting the wage. So it turned out to be very successful. Around 92% of the employees replied that they are satisfied with the new policy. Also, the company reduced the amount of in-person meetings and increased the amount of virtual and remote settings. So as a result, the majority of employees were able to efficiently use their free time, do leisure activities, and the productivity hiked up by 39.9%, and the electricity usage within the office went down by 23.1%. So this allowed the company to cut the maintenance costs. So this case actually directly shows that companies can actually boost the productivity while offering the same salary to its workers.
It seems to be a win-win for everyone
Right.
then. Now, we asked our global viewers what they think about this 4-day workweek policy as well, if they're for or against it. Take a look at the screen to find out what our viewers had to say about today's discussion topic. Jean said, I think it's a good idea because currently many employees work more hours than they expected. Having one more day off will efficiently distribute the total hours per week that workers usually do. User says, I'm for. It'll raise your quality of life. It gives you more free time and you can have enough time for spending quality time with your friends or family. Robert said, it'd be all right if the hours were set each day, but most small companies try and get the most they can from their workers. It may just add more pressure to put out the same amount of work in a shorter week. And we're going to find out more about the benefits and the remaining areas of improvement to implement a 4-day week globally. To do that, we're going to include a leading advocate of this flexible work policy in our talks. Stay tuned for our live interview. We're now going to talk to someone from 4-Day Week Global. As you can tell by the name, this organization advocates for a 4-day week. Let's turn to Alex Sujong Kimping, who works as the Director of Research and Innovation there. Welcome, Alex.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
All right, Alex, could you tell us a little bit more about your organization and why it was established? And I'm guessing it's because you guys think that there's many pros behind a 4-day work week. So tell us about that.
Sure. Well, it really is all in the name. We were founded in 2019 by a couple entrepreneurs in New Zealand who had implemented a 4-day week in their own company and had such a great experience that they wanted to sort of show other companies how to do it. And since then, we've run trials all over the world, including the UK trial that Cheska mentioned a few moments ago, where we work with organizations to shorten working hours without either cutting salaries or reducing productivity or output. And this year we're doing it with about 20 countries, in fact. Wow. So it's a movement that's growing rapidly.
Alex, as a half Kiwi, I take pride in that it started in New Zealand. So thank you for mentioning that. So one question I have for you is, why do you think our generation is particularly really strong and for this measure compared to other generations?
I think that, there are generational differences around the 4-day week, but not really generational resistance in the sense that, boomers don't refuse to do it, but for them, having spent so long with work being kind of central to their lives, it takes them a little more time to adjust to the idea and the reality of it. On the other hand, people who are younger in their careers but have enough experience to sort of see that you really can work differently and more efficiently.
Right.
And very often, have young kids at home or sort of want to start families. The opportunities that a 4-day week offer are pretty self-evident, on top of the fact that lots of millennials have a different attitude toward the place that work ought to have in our lives that is different from and in a lot of ways sort of healthier than those of Gen X or baby boomers.
Okay. So Alex, in your opinion, what kind of work or efforts do you think we really need in order to better implement the 4-day week globally?
That's a great question. And, it really is a global movement, right? This is something that we've seen we've run trials ourselves in Brazil and Portugal and South Africa. I know companies in Singapore, Malaysia, Korea who've done it. So it really is something that's happening all around the world. But I think that the next challenges are, for one thing, to get more governments behind trials. As you'd mentioned, Iceland and the UAE have already made this shift.
Right.
Other countries have kind of played around with it a little bit. Second, I think expanding in professions that take pride in overwork, like law and medicine, would be valuable. And then we really need to see how to encourage people to use AI to eliminate unnecessary work and create more time, while disincentivizing companies from using AI to simply eliminate jobs. So I think those are the big challenges we've got going forward.
I think those are great ideas, and hopefully world governments can gather together to really implement that. Thank you so much, Alex. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And on an ending note, where do you guys want to see this 4-day work week idea take us from now on?
As Alex mentioned, I think flexibility is the key word for our generation and the future generation. It's not so much about the resistance, but it's about adaptation. So I do wish that we continue having more flexibility in just choosing options.
Exactly. What about you, Sang-yeon?
So in a long run, if we just can smoothly embed this 4-day week policy to our society, I think it will boost the birth rate in the end, which is a chronic issue nowadays in Korea. Because more couples will have more time to care for their children, and the younger generation will think, oh, now I can finally care my children and have families. And if this social belief spread across our society, then it will overall boost the birth rate.
And I think we're living in blessed times. We have so much technology out there, as Alex mentioned. There's AI tech, what we mentioned before, even in our news feed. It does boost efficiency. So if we have a great balance of technology and human personnel, I think it can all add on to this new flexible working system.
Love that statement.
Because as you said, Cheska, happy life, happy. In order for you to have a happy life, you need to have a happy company. Happy people will equal a happy country.
Happy country.
Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dain-hong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Im Sang-yeon.
Thank you as always.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News
Generation.